My name is Lark. I'm 27. Dad's office smelled like lemon polish and old victories. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to feel like it was counting me out. My twin, Caleb, leaned back in the leather chair, sneaker tapping the floor like a drum roll he'd written for himself. Dad slid a thick white envelope across the desk to him. 300,000, he said, casual, like he was passing the salt. Real money for a real idea. Caleb grinned, the grin that always meant the room had tilted his way. Told you the app is revolutionary, he said, tucking the envelope into his backpack. I watched the metal zipper close over it like a mouth deciding not to speak. I stood beside the bookcase, fingers brushing the spine of a finance textbook I'd read, and he hadn't. And me? I asked steady. I've got a plan too. Dad didn't look at me right away. He picked up the silver key he kept on his desk, just a lonely key on a ring, something he twirled when he was thinking, and let it click against the wood. You're resourceful, Lark, he said, eyes finally meeting mine. Figure it out yourself. Caleb snorted softly. Don't be dramatic, he said. You still wear that perfume. A random, floating jab, like a paper airplane meant to land anywhere but on him. I didn't answer. I wanted to laugh and I wanted to cry, and both felt like giving them a show. So I watched instead. The blinds cut the winter light into bar codes across the carpet. Somewhere in the house, ice cracked in a glass, like something tiny shattering far away. Dad, I said, trying again. If the money is for a plan, listen to mine. I opened my folder, spreadsheets, projected cash flows, a modest ask. He didn't touch it. The silver key clicked again. Caleb's is high growth, he said. Yours is steady. I believe in bets. On him, I said. On vision, he replied. Caleb pushed away from the desk, backpack slung, confidence swaying in the air like cologne. We good, he asked, already halfway to the door. Go make me proud, Dad said. Caleb paused beside me, voice low. We'll hire you when we scale, he murmured. It was meant to sound generous. It sounded like a leash. The door closed. The room breathed. I reached for my folder. Dad didn't stop me because he didn't have to. I slid the pages back into place and felt the weight of them, the clean edges, the quiet math that didn't need applause to be true. Engagement. Has your family ever handed someone else the shortcut and told you to build the road yourself? Tell me in the comments. I turned to go. The silver key lay in the square of light on the desk, small and bright, a symbol I suddenly understood. It didn't open any door for me, and maybe it never had. Somewhere inside, something calmer than anger settled. The simple knowledge that I didn't need their key. I would become the lock. The first weeks after that meeting moved like shadows stretched by headlights, fast in some directions, painfully slow in others. Caleb threw launch parties for his revolutionary app before a single line of code was finished. He rented a co-working space with glass walls, neon signs, and cold brew on tap. Photos of him holding microphones and grinning in borrowed blazers began to appear on Dad's Facebook feed, always captioned with things like the future belongs to dreamers. And me? I worked nights, days, any space in between. My plan wasn't flashy. It was a logistic solution for local vendors, simple and effective. I partnered with people no one in Dad's office had ever bothered to notice. Women in crowded markets, small shop owners, drivers who spent more time fixing their trucks than driving them. They gave me their trust before they gave me their money, and that was enough. Still, the divide was clear. At family dinners, Dad angled all questions to Caleb. How's growth? How many sign-ups? Caleb answered like a magician who'd never touched a deck of cards. Hundreds in the pipeline, Dad. Thousands by year end. And you, Lark. Dad asked me once, out of obligation. 5 shops signed. Deliveries already up 30%. Caleb laughed into his wine. Cute, he muttered. The silver key appeared again one night, resting on Dad's napkin, catching the chandelier light. He twirled it when Caleb spoke, nodded when Caleb bragged. I watched, silent, the key becoming something else in my mind. Not just access, but favoritism made metal. A totem of all the doors closed to me. Then came the first crack. I was walking past Caleb's office when I overheard a voice, shaky, urgent. One of his developers. "Caleb, the app keeps crashing. You can't demo this." Caleb's reply was a whisper, sharp. "Just fake it. Investors don't care about code, they care about pitch." I kept walking, heartbeat heavy, my folder pressed against my ribs. 2 weeks later, Dad showed up at my place unannounced. He didn't sit down. He didn't even take off his coat. "Your brother's bleeding cash," he said low. "He's asked for another 100,000. I waited. Silence can be a scalpel. Finally, he added, "You wouldn't consider helping him, would you?" I almost laughed. Helping the brother who mocked me, who had been handed the world while I was told to figure it out. Instead, I looked at Dad steady. "What did you say when I asked for help?" The room chilled. He didn't answer. I walked him to the door. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the clarity that had finally taken shape. The silver key had never been mine, but the locks of tomorrow? Those were. Caleb's collapse didn't happen in one dramatic explosion. It leaked slowly like a pipe behind a wall, until the plaster bulged and cracked where everyone could see. First came the investors. One by one, they stopped returning his calls. Then the developers. Half his team quit, citing unpaid invoices. Soon, the co-working space that once glowed with neon was empty. Glass walls reflecting nothing but Caleb's pacing silhouette. At home, Dad still defended him. "Every visionary faces setbacks," he said at Sunday dinner. Even Jobs got fired from his own company. "Jobs built something that worked," I murmured. Dad's fork clattered on his plate. "Watch your tone." I watched Caleb instead, his shoulders stiff, his smile cracking. The arrogance that used to pour from him now looked more like sweat. He reached for his wine, but missed the glass, hand trembling. Meanwhile, my work grew. The vendors called me by name, sometimes sister, sometimes daughter. I rode in the back of their delivery vans, listened to every complaint about traffic, fuel, broken crates. And every note became a line in my system. By spring, I wasn't just steady, I was scaling. The first article appeared online one morning. Local startup struggles after bold promises. The photo showed Caleb in that borrowed blazer, microphone frozen midair. I saved the screenshot, not to gloat, yet, but to remember how carefully the world builds altars, then abandons them. That night, Mom called me. Her voice was thin, stretched. "Lark, your father hasn't slept. He's worried about Caleb. This business failure. The money he gave him, you mean?" She sighed. "Can't you try to be kinder?" "Kindness was what I offered the day I opened my folder," I said. No one wanted it. A pause. Then, softer. "I always thought you smelled like your grandmother's perfume." She fought the same way, quiet, steady. "Don't lose that." It was the first time I felt seen, and it broke me a little. 2 weeks later, I was invited to a vendor conference downtown. My booth was small, tucked in the corner, but busy. A journalist stopped by, notebook in hand. This model, simple but efficient. Where'd the idea come from? "From being overlooked," I said before I could stop myself. When the article came out, Dad clipped it, folded it into a newspaper, and left it on the kitchen table without a word. The silver key lay beside it. For the first time, I realized he wasn't twirling it anymore. Caleb stormed in later that night, cheeks red. "You think you're better than me now," he hissed. I didn't answer. Silence, again, was sharper. And in that silence, I knew the lock was turning. By summer, the cracks weren't cracks anymore. They were canyons. Caleb's office lease was terminated. The team had vanished, leaving him alone with a laptop he barely knew how to use. He came back home, dragging boxes filled with broken promises, dropping them in the foyer like discarded luggage after a failed vacation. Dad's face hardened, but his words softened. We can rebuild. We'll get another investor. But the investors didn't come back. They had already started calling me. At first, it was cautious. We've been watching your growth, Lark. Interesting traction. Then it was eager. You've got something real here. Can we schedule a meeting? I met them, not in neon-lit co-working spaces, but in the market alleys where my app thrived, the smell of fried dough and exhaust mixing in the air. I let the vendors talk, their voices raw with honesty. That authenticity did more than any glossy pitch deck Caleb could have bought. At home, the tension thickened. Dad barely spoke to me, though my newspaper clippings multiplied on the fridge like uninvited guests. The silver key sat in his study, gathering dust. He touched it less and less, as if its meaning had corroded along with Caleb's empire. One evening, I returned late, tired but light from another successful round of funding talks. Caleb was in the kitchen, slouched at the table, head in his hands. A half-empty glass of whiskey glowed amber under the dim bulb. "You think you've won," he muttered without lifting his head. I set down my bag. "It's not about winning, Caleb. It's about working." His laugh was bitter, sharp. "You always wanted to be the martyr, the responsible twin. You think Dad loves you more now? He doesn't. He can't. You're just the safe option." I studied him for a moment. His hair unkempt, his shirt stained. The backpack that once held $300,000 slumped on the floor like a deflated balloon. "Maybe safe builds longer roads," I said quietly. He lifted his head then, eyes glassy, and for a flicker I saw the boy I grew up with, the one who built tree forts out of cardboard, who dared me to jump into rivers first. But the flicker passed, buried under resentment. "Dad's ruined," he whispered. "The money's gone. All of it." I felt the words land heavy, not just because of the money, but because of what it meant. Dad's blind faith, the silver key, the hierarchy of trust. It had all collapsed with Caleb's dream. I left him there, staring into the bottom of his glass, and went upstairs. On my nightstand sat my folder, edges worn now from use. I slid it open, ran my hand over the neat rows of numbers. Growth, stability, truth. And for the first time, the weight didn't feel like burden. It felt like proof. The house grew quieter after that night. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. This was the hush of broken glass swept into a corner, sharp and waiting. Dad stopped talking about Caleb's vision. The word itself seemed to sour in his mouth. Instead, he wandered the halls, staring at his phone, replaying emails from banks that wouldn't return his calls. His suits hung looser on his shoulders. The silver key remained on his desk, untouched, like a relic from a religion he no longer practiced. I kept building. My days blurred into deliveries, vendor meetings, coding sessions that stretched past midnight. My body ached, but my soul was electric. Each new contract signed, each graph edging upward, felt like proof of something bigger than survival. It felt like vindication. Then one evening, I came home to find Caleb in Dad's study. The silver key was in his hand, twirling desperate. "Put it down," I said from the doorway. He spun in the chair. His eyes were red, tired, furious. "You think you're the chosen one now, don't you? Dad gave me everything, and you," his voice broke. "You stole it." "I didn't steal," I said. "I worked." He slammed the key onto the desk. The clink echoed like a gunshot. "You always were the quiet thief, taking what should have been mine by pretending to be noble." For a moment, I thought he'd cry. Instead, he stood, brushing past me with a muttered curse. The key remained on the desk, caught in a ray of moonlight. I walked over, stared at it. For years, it symbolized everything I'd been denied. Now it looked smaller, ordinary. It was just metal. The next morning, I received an email from a major investor. Subject line, proposal accepted. My logistics system was going regional. Trucks, contracts, a proper office. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. Later that day, Dad finally came to me. His voice was thinner than I'd ever heard. "Lark," he said, "we need your help." I studied him. The man who once said, "Figure it out yourself." His tie was loose, his eyes heavy with unspoken regret. "What do you need?" I asked carefully. "Caleb's debts. My debt's the house. We can't hold it." Silence stretched. I thought of the vendors who trusted me, the system I was building, the family dinners where I was invisible. And I realized the lock was mine now. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I let the silence answer for me. Because sometimes silence is the most expensive currency of all. The silence lingered for days after Dad's request. He didn't press me, not outright, but I felt the weight of his footsteps outside my door, the pause before he walked on. Caleb, meanwhile, sulked like a storm cloud trapped indoors, rage without lightning, thunder without rain. I buried myself in work. The expansion deal meant sleepless nights and endless calls, but it also meant freedom. My vendors, my people, were no longer just surviving, they were growing alongside me. Every time I visited a shop and saw shelves stacked higher, drivers with steadier pay, I felt a kind of pride my family's approval had never given me. Still, the fractures at home deepened. One night, Mom cornered me in the kitchen. Her hands trembled as she poured tea neither of us wanted. "Your father, he's ashamed," she said softly, "but he doesn't know how to say it." "He doesn't need to," I replied. She looked at me, eyes wet. "Do you ever wonder if victory without forgiveness feels hollow?" Her words followed me upstairs. I lay awake, staring at the folder on my nightstand, the same one Dad once ignored. Now it had grown into files, contracts, projections, proof that I had never needed his key. And yet a strange emptiness pulsed in the triumph. The breaking point came on a humid Thursday. I was preparing for a presentation when Caleb barged into my workspace. His hair was unwashed, his shirt wrinkled, but his eyes burned with the last embers of entitlement. "You think you're untouchable," he spat, "but you're just riding my failure. If Dad hadn't backed me, no one would have noticed you." I stood slow. If Dad hadn't backed you, we'd still have a house without cracks in the walls. He stepped closer, voice shaking. "One day you'll fall, and when you do, no one will catch you." I should have been angry. Instead, I saw him for what he was. Not a rival, not even an enemy, but a cautionary tale. After he stormed out, I found myself alone in Dad's study. The silver key was still there, dusty, forgotten. I picked it up. It felt lighter than I remembered, almost weightless. I placed it gently in the drawer and closed it. The doorbell rang the next morning. A courier. Envelope. Inside, the finalized investment contract. Numbers bold, signatures crisp. My system wasn't just surviving anymore. It was the future. And for the first time, I didn't think of Caleb or Dad or even the silver key. I thought of myself and how sweet it felt to finally own the lock, the door, and the house built behind it. The day of my investor presentation arrived with the kind of heat that makes the air itself restless. The conference room was sleek, glass walls, polished wood, a projector humming faintly overhead. I stood at the head of the table, my folder open before me. Only this time, it wasn't paper clippings and ignored plans. It was contracts, growth charts, testimonials from vendors who had doubled their business through my system. As I spoke, I saw nods. Real nods. The kind that meant numbers and lives aligned. The investors asked sharp questions, and I answered with sharper facts. No borrowed blazer, no empty promises. Just truth dressed in proof. When it was over, the lead investor smiled. "You've built something honest," she said. "We're in." Her words echoed in my chest. Honest. That was all I had ever been, and all I had ever needed. But while my world expanded, home kept shrinking. Dad sat longer in his study, the curtains half drawn. Caleb avoided me, though sometimes I heard him late at night, pacing, muttering. Once, I caught the faint sound of him crying in the garage, the kind of crying that comes from someone who has finally run out of versions of himself to perform. Then came the family dinner. the first we'd had in months. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the clink of silverware. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Lark," he said, his voice rasping. "I misjudged." The room stilled. Caleb stared at his plate, knuckles white around his fork. "I thought vision meant flash," Dad continued. "I thought risk was proof of genius. But it seems steady hands build stronger bridges." He looked at me then, really looked. His eyes were tired, but something else flickered. Respect, maybe even pride. I didn't answer right away. My eyes landed on the silver key resting on the sideboard, gleaming faintly in the low light. Once it had been everything I wanted. Now it was just decoration. "I didn't need the key," I said quietly. "I just needed you to believe I could build my own door." A silence followed, but it wasn't sharp this time. It was soft, like a curtain lowering at the end of a play. Mom reached for my hand under the table. Caleb stood abruptly, chair scraping. "This isn't over," he muttered, storming out. I watched him go, my heart heavy, not with victory, but with the weight of what rivalry had stolen from us both. Dad's eyes lingered on the key, then back on me. "Maybe it's time I gave that to you," he said. But I shook my head. "It's yours to carry. I already have what I need." And for the first time he nodded, not in dismissal, but in understanding. Autumn arrived, and with it a different kind of stillness. The heat broke, the leaves turned, and the silence at home no longer felt like shame. It felt like surrender. My company had gone regional. Trucks with my logo moved through streets. I once walked on foot, carrying goods for vendors who now called me not just sister, but partner. My phone rang with opportunity instead of rejection. Each call reminded me of those nights when I sat alone with my folder, trying to believe I was enough. One evening, Dad asked to meet me outside the house, not in his study, not in the kitchen heavy with unspoken words, but at the park where he once taught Caleb and me to ride bikes. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. The benches were cool beneath us. He held the silver key in his palm, the same key he'd once twirled like a promise I could never reach. His hand trembled as he offered it to me. "I thought this symbolized trust," he said quietly, "but it only showed favoritism. I owe you more than this key, Lark. I owe you an apology." I looked at it, small, shining, meaningless now. "You don't need to give me that," I said. "You need to carry the weight of what it meant." His shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked less like the unshakable man I grew up with and more like someone who could admit regret. Caleb didn't come. He drifted, his bitterness carving distance between us all. Sometimes I caught glimpses of him in town, shoulders hunched, avoiding my eyes. I no longer chased his approval. I couldn't save him from himself. Instead, I focused on what I could build. At my company's new office, sunlight poured through wide windows. On the wall hung a framed article, "Quiet Hands, Steady Roads: How One Woman Built a Network from Scratch." Beneath it sat my old folder, preserved behind glass, proof of where it began. During the office opening, a journalist asked me what my success meant to me. I smiled, soft but certain. "It means I no longer measure my worth by who handed out the keys. I became the lock, the door, and the house behind it." That night, I walked home under the streetlights. For the first time in years, the weight in my chest wasn't longing, it was clarity. I didn't need revenge in fire or fury. My revenge was steadiness. My revenge was becoming undeniable. And as the wind whispered through the trees, I thought, sometimes the sweetest justice is simply proving that you never needed what they refused to give.